Yeah, we start. Okay, wonderful. Well, hi, I'm Marzena Rostek. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you to Columbia for organizing the lecture series. It's a delight to be part of it. It's a terrific resource also for me because I'll get to know you better. I'd like to spend these two lectures on various topics and recent developments on financial market design. This is a literature in which I myself participated, but I would like to cover recent advances a bit more broadly. So I'll tend to focus on financial markets, but most of what we'll cover is relevant for other markets and actually non-market interactions as well. Feel free to interrupt at any point. These lectures are for you also. If you'd like to talk about your work or the job market, I'm here, so please email me. And I'll be delighted to meet. All right. So in the classical equilibrium theory, the kind of theory I learned in graduate school, markets are centralized. Okay? There is a single market clearing for all traders and all assets. Now, in practice, essentially all financial assets are traded in multiple coexisting exchanges and trading venues of various kinds. They often for the same traders and the same assets. This is the case not only for assets with units as heterogeneous as real estate, but also for markets with homogeneous assets. Okay? And we need to look no further than the markets for stocks and bonds. Okay, so for instance, most bonds, government, municipal, corporate, are traded almost exclusively over the counter and have traded for decades. In fact, almost since the inception of the bond market. When the bond market was set up, it functioned as an exchange for, I think, just 5 years, and then trade moved over the counter. Now, even equity markets are highly fragmented. So I like to give as an example, the New York Stock Exchange is a case. I like to give this example. I've given it over the years, and the numbers have changed a little bit, but the punchline remains. So if you look at the assets listed on the New York Stock Exchange, right? So these are some of the most transparent liquid assets. Today, less than a quarter of listed stocks is traded. Less than a quarter of the volume of the listed stocks is executed on the New York Stock Exchange. The remaining volume occurs in 15 other public exchanges, right? So there are 16 public exchanges for stocks in the US today, where public refers to the fact that all traders can participate there. Over 30 private exchanges. Okay, so think of dark pools, liquidity pools. These have participation restricted mostly to large institutional investors. Some started by retail flow, and over 200 dealer networks. Okay. So I'm essentially giving you a complete description of the top of the equity markets in the US today. But this is representative across asset classes, domestic, international, no matter how we cut the data. More generally, in the past 2-3 decades now, new electronic marketplaces have emerged, which have come to dominate trade. These electronic marketplaces offer different types of market clearing. Okay? So for instance, a direct matching to an intermediary, trading in a dealer network, or an all-to-all exchange, but online, to different types of traders, institutional, retail, and intermediaries. Now, to be sure, what's novel about these electronic marketplaces is not the availability of different trading arrangements to different types of traders. Goldman Sachs has always had a trading desk for large institutional investors. We used to call these markets upstairs markets. There's a whole string of literature on upstairs markets. What electronic trading has brought are new frequencies, new technologies to clear assets, and the use of artificial intelligence. All right, so if it were feasible to centralize all of the trading in financial markets, would such a centralized market structure be efficient, right? So this will be our organizing question today. That will be our objectives: understand the potential for a fragmented market to create gains from trade. It will also look at possible ways to model fragmented or decentralized markets. And the focus question in the modeling part will be the following: what are the decentralized market equilibrium effects which have no centralized market counterparts?
That may be out of your scope, but there is no problem. There is no information friction here in this world, right? So there is nothing.
Traders will have private information, but we want that, and I'll actually talk about why we want that. We don't want to be working with models with complete information, because private information is an important source of inefficiency, and I like to think about market design or the choice between market structures as an exercise about reallocating the surplus among the traders. That's really what market design does, right? It reallocates the surplus among the traders.
There is some channel of the screening or seeding this.
Even if these even if adverse selection or screening and signaling do not play a role, we'll see that there will be a case for market fragmentation, right? So actually, this is the objective. To abstract away from these additional considerations, which we kind of intuitively feel might lead to fragmentation, and see in a plain vanilla model, what are the fundamental forces for market fragmentation? Okay? Not in a sense of stability, but welfare. All right. Okay, so let's take a look at the literature. We noted yesterday that there are many different ways to model fragmented markets. There is no canonical model just yet, but still, as we are transitioning towards working with and teaching optimization methods through various models of fragmented markets, there are at least two classes of models which have been popular. Most modern models of decentralized markets are based on graphs, random or fixed. One approach popular in parts of macro and finance assumes that trade takes place through a random matching in large markets among a continuum of traders who are small relative to the market. Okay, so I listed the papers in the early literature. Many people have contributed to our thinking. One paper that is often credited with stimulating the literature is Duffy, Garliano, and Peterson, 2005 Econometrica. The title of the paper was Over-the-Counter Market. Many papers follow. Empirically, while in some markets, traders indeed search for a counterparty. In others, for instance, in dealer networks or intra-dealer markets or interbank systems, relationships are not random and are dominated by large institutional investors who have price impact. Okay? In fact, in practice, dealing with a strategic behavior or traders' price impact is often seen as the primary motivation to create an over-the-counter exchange or to introduce a new financial product. So the fact that traders are non-negligible in the market might matter for why we see fragmented markets, okay? Even if centralizing all of the trading were feasible.
So in a search and matching framework, it's not necessary to have anonymous traders, small traders, and random match, right? They could have large traders, directed search, and so on, right?
So this is where the literature, in fact, you're probably, I mean, the labor people talked about fragmented markets or over-the-counter markets before finance people did, right? Some Nobel Prizes happened, in fact. In finance, the first wave of papers was based on random matching, and now people are introducing heterogeneity and directed search. And yeah, we'll talk a little bit about that.
But that issue seems different, separate from whether or not they have a market power and the kind of issue that we are.
Right, also separate, right? Exactly.
But this literature, some of them kind of have this, market power. Or so there are three to one.
The first, I mean, papers in finance based on random matching, no. I mean, the most recent papers that are not cited here are kind of going chronologically. So, yeah, some job market papers have been written recently trying to incorporate market power. One issue is that this literature is also based on conditioning on there being a link, surpluses shared through bargaining. And, these are indivisible goods.
So the market power issue is kind of incorporated in some of the networks approach where they have a bargain.
A little bit. But so in the searching matching approach, I mean, one of the challenges, even today, there was a conference in honor of the VGP paper at MIT 3 or 4 weeks ago, and Peter Weil gave an overview presentation and a historical account of the literature, and then he said, well, even today, that the key challenge is linking these models to asset pricing, and this requires introducing multi-unit demands, right? So that we can talk about pricing power or market power. Okay, so a related point actually is that if generalizing a bit, a common comparative statics in these models tells us that as a friction, let's say a search friction in the time needed to find a counterparty goes to 0, the superior, efficient, centralized market-like environment appears in the limit. Right? So the very way decentralization is introduced in these models as a friction in a perfectly competitive environment presupposes that we are operating away from efficiency. Now, having said that, this is a very important and literature, a very relevant class of models since 2005. This class of models has developed substantially, and like I said, people have incorporated directed search or are incorporating directed search now and heterogeneity, and we'll talk a little bit about it later. But here's another reason why, if we want to understand the efficiency gains from decentralization of trade, we might want to try a different approach than working with a graph-based model, right? Actually random or fixed. So just as the classical equilibrium theory assume that there is a single exchange for all traders and all assets, i.e. the centralized market assumption, the existing literature on fragmented markets, for the most part, has made a polar opposite assumption, namely that all of the transactions in the market are bilateral, okay? Or all of the relationships in the market are bilateral. However, bilateral trades constitute only a fraction of all trades. Right? Traders also participate in exchanges, private or public. From an econometrician's point of view, if we collect data on prices and trades from a given market and assume that the data was generated by a model with purely bilateral relations, this assumption may introduce biases in inference and lead to artifacts in the data. I mean, this is a simple point. Sometimes we can identify the centralized market with a complete graph, right? So each trader trades with every other trader, but more generally, Nash equilibria incomplete graphs differ from those in which agents can interact as a group, as they would in an exchange, right? So we really have to be doing something differently. All right, so just to summarize, we want the main characteristic of markets we want to take seriously as the traders are large and have price impact, and we will want to allow for trades aren't just bilateral trades. A couple of
just to be clear on that last point about even with a complete graph, the model about the equilibrium transactions executed in a bilateral fashion will differ from that occurring in the exchange. So it has to do with like the issue that you mentioned, namely that you are sort of taking the prices as given in the other bilateral transactions, when you actually negotiate or whatever on the price. So in a sense that it's similar to what you showed yesterday.
These cross relationships counterfactual will matter. Again, it's a little hard to do it if you work with bargaining models, because this requires modeling bargaining with externalities, which we know is difficult. Right? Bargaining with externalities across players and across contracts, across your relationships. Right? I mean, this problem has led to the popularity of models based on Nash and Nash, which are taking the literature by storm. Right. So speaking of bargaining, traditionally, the terms of trade in these models have been determined by bargaining with complete information. Right. So if we work with a bargaining model with complete information, then conditionally on there being a link between a buyer and a seller, surplus sharing is efficient. Right. And we know from the literature on two-sided, so buyer and seller private information, that if we allow for buyer and seller private information allocation would not be efficient, right? And this source of inefficiency, conditional on there being a link, will be crucial for understanding the efficiency benefits from market fragmentation. Right, market structure, the changes to market structure will be critical to determining how that inefficiency is reallocated among the traders. Right? That's really what market design does. It reallocates the surplus or the inefficiency among market participants. All right, so we want private information, and we want the terms of trade to be determined by a price mechanism. Right, these counterfactuals that Yonko just mentioned will be important. And descriptively, I mean, even in over-the-counter markets, where traditionally transactions were set all over the phone, most of the transactions have shifted to electronic auctions. Only large bespoke transactions are negotiated over the phone, right? So even OTC, in OTC markets, we see price mechanisms. All right, okay. I like talking about the literature, but let's move on. So we will work with a model that can we want to work with a model that can directly nest the standard centralized market model, okay? So that we can identify the effects of market fragmentation, and we can directly compare the centralized and decentralized market equilibrium. All right, and we will do so in a quadratic Gaussian setting, right? So this will be familiar. A finite number of traders trade K risky assets. Traders derive utility from their post-trade allocation, which is the sum of their initial endowments, QI0 and trade QI. These endowments are private information. Let's assume that they are independent, private, across traders and assets. So fundamentally, the gains from trade come from the desire to diversify and share risk, right? These endowments are heterogeneous, and so can be risk preferences alpha I. So that's completely standard. The only assumption of the centralized market model we intend to relax is that trading is centralized. All right.
IID, we're talking about this initial.
We want them to be independent, right? So that we
distribution on this.
All right. So I know I know how many units I hold. I do not know the positions of my counterpart.
And you take like a prior distribution of those positions.
Right. Right.
According to which distribution?
Jointly normal.
Oh,
Yes. Yes. Everything is jointly normal. Yes.
Because you said that.
Contractability, right. Endowments are also jointly normal.
Okay.
Thank you for keeping me grounded. Yeah. All right. So yesterday we observed that there are at least two assumptions implicit in a centralized market assumption.
So I'm sorry.
Yes.
So the normal D.
Both for D and for the.
This is the payoffs are distributed with mean D.
With mean D.
I see. Okay.
This is a preference.
And covariance sigma. So yeah, this is a standard mean variance setting. So the mean enters as the intercept, and the covariance enters as the Hessian of the payoff function. There is a way to induce it if you work with a current normal setting, maximizing expected carry utility.
So are you describing the distribution of QIs? QI zeros. When you describe the first.
No,
the-
she didn't speak.
So there's another normal distribution for QI.
Exactly.
Okay, I see, okay.
Everything that is
Right.
random is
Right.
normally distributed.
Alpha is commonly known, right? It's public information, alpha high.
Yes, but
It's secret as well, right?
it will be interesting to ask what the traders actually need to know in order to bet optimally about this market. But thank you. Okay, so yesterday we observed that there are at least two assumptions implicit in the centralized market assumption. One is that traders' participation in the market is complete in the following sense: each trader trades all assets with all other investors. And the second one is that demand conditioning is complete, right? Demands are fully contingent. The demand for each asset is contingent on the full price vector, which we know now that requires joint clearing of all assets, right? So yesterday we relaxed the second assumption while maintaining the first assumption. Today we will relax the first assumption, keeping the second assumption. Okay, so by relaxing each of these assumptions separately, we can identify different decentralized market effects that have no centralized market counterparts. Okay, that's the idea here. So we can do it in a systematic way. Of course, the markets in practice are somewhere in between, but we're trying to identify decentralized market effects that do not appear in equilibrium in centralized market models.
Just a quick question. Right?
Yes.
So for the centralized trading model here, or some decentralized model you're going to introduce.
Mhm.
So there is market power, but compared to the dynamic search models, and also the model like the chaos model, that you do not have the dynamic aspect, right? So given that the guy has private information and market power, and this dynamic aspect is actually important, right? So do they have a signaling screening component that he mentioned previously will kick in?
Oh, right. Oh, okay. You made two important points. What is about signaling and screening? Ultimately, we want to understand how screening and adverse selection and private information affects the incentives, but the first step will be to see if there's an argument for market fragmentation, even if these effects do not play a role. And now about dynamic incentives. Well, when we work with random matching models, we actually characterize a dynamic equilibria, right? This is how equilibria are characterized in these models. And so in these models, market fragmentation arises only through a dynamic counterfactual. The effect of market fragmentation arises only through a dynamic counterfactual, right? Conditionally on a negotiation breakdown in any given round. Right? The effect of market fragmentation appear only in anticipation of a market breakdown in the first order condition. So if we want to separate the effect of market fragmentation in a cross section versus a time series, ideally we would want to work with a model of pragmatic markets that is well defined also in a one-shot name. That's one answer.
But if I think about the chaos insider trading type of models, right? So there, the guy with market,
which models?
with both informed traders and uninformed traders.
I see.
Where the guy with market power, with private information, he would like to, he has incentive to delay trade, for example, to gradually release his information. And also, market you show it's never a one-shot market, right?
Jimmy, absolutely. So I mean, these effects have been studied in centralized market settings as well. They are relevant there, right? So everything that has been relevant in centralized market settings will be relevant here. Right now, let's look at the plain vanilla.
I agree. I'm just want to throw things out before I see a model. Yeah.
Oh, I see. Yeah. So
I agree that we should look at this to begin with, but yeah.
I have a clarification question actually. So did you say that you have a control? I mean, it's quite clear what you mean by centralized market. So it's conditioned on every prices of all assets, all prices of the asset. In the decentralized, I'm gonna make an assumption about this. So I'm gonna it's a QIPK is the model for decentralization that we're gonna talk about today.
let's talk about that model. No, we will not talk about this model. We will talk about a different model today. Right. So yesterday we assumed that each trader trades all assets with every other traded contract. So all traders trade all assets. Participation was complete.
Right.
And we relaxed the assumption of fully contingent demands.
Exactly.
Yeah. Today we will work with fully contingent demands.
In the decentralized market
Yes,
as well.
but we will relax the assumption of complete participation, right? So let's actually take a look. What exactly is the class of market structures we can accommodate?
So I've taken actually ignore number 2 here.
Let's ignore number 2. I just wanted to kind of look back so that it was clear. I also wanted to point out that yesterday we maintain assumption number 1. We relax assumption number 2. Today we will maintain assumption number 2 and we relax the assumption number 1.
There are 2 assumptions on number 2 lines on number 2. Which one? The first one you're going to use?
So the assumption number 2 is that demands are fully
Oh, okay.
contingent,
The first one, yes.
as opposed to
Sorry. Yeah.
yeah. No, thank you. Yes, Elliot.
So, but absent assumption 1, it is sort of complete demand conditioning. Do I,
In the exchanges where you participate only.
okay,
Yeah,
but I guess, so the co-domain is an exchanges where I participate only, right? But as far as the domain, in principle, the world is relevant to, is relevant to the choices I might want to make. Like I kind of.
So you run into the same issue as you did address yesterday, right? With the
equilibrium will be exposed because we are working with independent private values. So even if you condition on the whole world, it will not change the optimality of your bet.
Okay.
With independent private values. That's a quick answer.
Okay. In principle,
Maybe
there
a
might
better
be other
answer. Yeah,
equilibria
maybe
people-
maybe
or
no, actually not here. Maybe a better answer is the following. So if you would like to consider richer information structures, right, so that algorithm is not exposed, then this question would actually be relevant. This question is actually relevant also for the model yesterday, right? You might say, hey, even if I cannot condition my demands for an asset on a contemporaneous price of another asset, nobody can prohibit me from conditioning my demand on past prices. Right? Of any asset from any exchange, as long as these prices are observable. Right? So that's the process of conditioning matter. Well, it does. The ability to condition my demands on past prices, actually contingent or uncontingent demands, any demands, allows me to incorporate the information about past shocks that renew the gains from trade shocks to information, liquidity, and so on, right, in my demand behavior. The ability to condition my demand on the contemporaneous price from another exchange, that is for how the current round shocks affect demand behavior. And that's what this uncontingent model yesterday was about. It was a static model. It was a static model. Now you might say, well, what if trading is continuous, right? Like what if we consider high frequency markets? The significance of these effects we talked about yesterday will depend on the relative frequency of trading rounds and shocks that renew the gains from trade, right? But you can see that if shocks to, let's say, information are as frequent as trading round, the effects we talked about will be occurred over in any round of a dynamic market, and that's also in the limit as we take to 25. Okay. Thank you.
So just a quick clarification. What's your claim previously about independent private value?
We will work with independent private values today, and my claim is that if you actually let me introduce them, and then I will repeat the claim because I think it will be clearer. All right, so here, what is the class of market structures we will work with? Well, let's allow trades to trade assets in many exchanges, each with a separate market clearing price. Okay, an exchange is defined by a subset of agents who trade there and a subset of assets traded. Okay, so a subset of agents and a subset of assets traded. If we index agents by I, assets by K, and exchanges by N, and the collection of all exchanges, okay, each defined by a subset of agents who trade there and a subset of assets traded, completely describes the market structure, and together with a set of traders and assets, mathematically represents a hypergraph. Okay, so a hypergraph is just a generalization of a graph that allows an edge, an exchange here, to connect many traders rather than two. So mathematically, a hypergraph is defined as a set of elements, nodes, and a set of edges, exchanges here, or a set of all subsets of X. So in our model, the set of elements is the tuple, the set of agents and assets. An edge is an exchange. The set of all edges is the set of all exchanges, right? This is the set of all edges. Yes.
The participation is
Yes. Yes, the participation is exogenous.
I'm
Yes.
still confused. Suppose there are two assets, and I have, I trade both assets. You trade both assets. But maybe there are two exchanges. It's trading only one asset, separate assets, right? Then effectively you are kind of dealing with the uncontingent schedule, right? Demand schedule, demand bid, right? Because then
Could you say it again? So yeah,
because each exchange I only can submit bid for that trade,
Mhm.
right? Demand schedule for only that the asset that's traded in that venue. So that means that it's not contingent on the price of the other asset.
But there is the beliefs, the expectation. Right?
Yeah. So that's all that. I mean, but that's what you did yesterday.
could you repeat? Could you just repeat your
So
example? Yes.
1 and 2 assets.
I see.
Okay, one is trading in one
Mhm.
exchange, 2 is trading in another
Mhm.
exchange.
Mhm.
But you said that
But you're trading both.
I'm trading.
I see. So okay. So now let me clarify. Here, traders submit contingent demands in the exchanges where they participate. So I only participate in I don't need to participate in all exchanges, but in
Right.
the exchanges where I participate, I submit a contingent demand.
So are you saying that if I'm participating in exchange 1,
Mhm.
I'm submitting contingent demand, contingent also on the price of 2?
Yes.
Oh, I see. Okay.
This is a sense in which we are isolating the effect of
Right.
incomplete participation alone.
I see the difference.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you for that question. Right. Okay, wonderful. So let me just give some examples. In a hypergraph, nodes may reside on many graphs, which captures that traders may participate in many different types of trading arrangements. Edges may originate from and point to a different graph. So there can be intermediation across markets. Graphs may contain other graphs as nodes. I mean, a hypergraph is a very rich object. It's an absurdly rich object, and it will be richer than what we need to make Wilford comparisons that are interesting. Hypergraphs can capture many different types of market structure. So let me just draw a picture. Right. So imagine an intradealer market. So the dealers interact among themselves. That's one exchange, and then each dealer has private clients who can then interact with periphery traders. And then there can be these traders can also participate in a private exchange. Right, a dark pool, and there can be a public exchange for everyone. Let's say for every class.
What is the rule?
Say it again.
What is excluded by the hypergraph modeling here?
I'm
What
sorry.
is excluded?
What is
It is
excluded?
excluded.
Seem very general, but I want to see what is the restriction.
In what sense are you? I mean, we will fix a particular market structure. We are going to fix it, and we will want to compute equilibrium, and then we will want to compare welfare. I'm not excluding any market structure. I don't want to exclude any market structures.
So what is, I mean, what is excluded by hypergraph?
It's a none.
No, okay.
I mean, there must be some disjoint domain you have in mind. So if you give me
Okay.
right, but like,
But in the example that I gave,
uh-huh.
what's the difference between centralized and decentralized? I mean, the difference is in somehow in the way market clears. So in some sense that I'm submitting in both cases, I'm submitting the same object, which is the, fully contingent demand for each asset.
But the clearing is just in that.
So that's exactly what I want to know, really.
Oh,
How is the clearing?
yes. Actually, this is exactly what we are going to talk about now, right? So how is the market organized? How does it clear? Well, in each exchange, trade takes place through a standard uniform price double auction. So traders will submit net demand schedules in the exchanges where they participate. The market clearing price will be determined as the price at which the aggregate net demand in that exchange is zero. Individual trades will then be given by the submitted schedules at the market clearing price. It will be easier to explain how market clearing works after we see the equation on the next slide.
So N of I is the type of asset I trade. Is that what you're saying?
The previous slide, right?
Right, and I is the set of exchanges in which trader I participates.
But this is different from our conversation, right? Because I thought that if there are two assets and only one asset is traded in one of the, in each venue, then I thought that you are saying that I submit the demand, which is contingent on the price of 1 and 2.
You are submitting your demand actually on the price vector in the exchanges where you participate. Right here, and you see it's a fully contingent demand. Contingent on the prices in the exchanges where you participate.
So in that case, there may not be any difference between centralized and decentralized.
There may not be any difference, which is an interesting question as well.
Okay, wow. Okay,
right?
good.
One of the questions that we want to understand is when a market that looks fragmented actually functions like the centralized market, and there will be a result that you are already anticipating.
Suppose in the centralized market, in this example, suppose I only trade. Let's say that in that case, I only trade one asset, right? One asset.
Yes.
In that case, it's different, right? Because then I will be submitting demand for that asset contingent only on that price, whereas in the centralized market, the demand that I must submit must be contingent on the price of the asset that I have and the price of the other asset that I don't have.
In the centralized market, I mean, you submit a fully contingent demand.
Even though I don't, the second asset is not part of an NY.
In the centralized market, I mean, we assume that all traders participating in the trade of all assets. That's the assumption of in the centralized market model.
I see. Okay, I got you now.
That we are talking right now.
I see.
Okay, so we'll be looking just to get it out of the way. We'll be looking at equilibria in linear demand schedules. So demands will be linear functions of prices, or inverse demands will be linear functions of quantities. And all traders are strategic, right? So nothing will save us on the presence of noise traders or not fully optimizing agents.
Can I say something about the market clearing condition?
Yes,
so
yes.
Q-bar.
Right. Okay. I will explain what Q-bar is. Actually, I will explain what Q-bar is. It shouldn't have been on that slide. All right. So this will be very quick. We'll be able to characterize equilibria in any market represented by a hypergraph through conditions that are similar to those in a centralized market. Okay, so the slide is the same as yesterday, but today I will draw some pictures. All right, so let's quickly review the standard centralized market model because we are going to build on this intuition, right? So suppose there is a single exchange for all traders and all assets, and all traders participate in the trade of all assets, right? Just like we assume when we study centralized market models. Well, in games in which traders submit price contingent demand and supply schedules, it's useful to think of a player as trading against the residual market, represented by his residual supply function, defined by aggregation of demand submitted by others. Right. So again, this motivates a point-wise optimization problem, choosing quantities as a function of price realizations as opposed to choosing functions, and these optimization problems are equivalent. In the point-wise problem, equilibria in games in demand and supply functions can be characterized equivalently through two simple conditions. The first one is the FOC, right? So U prime equals marginal revenue and marginal payment. And we are working with a net buyer here. Right, so lambda I is a trader's price impact. It's with K assets is a K by K Jacobian matrix. Its element KL represents the price change of assets L following a unilateral demand increase for assets. Yes, yes.
D is not observable, right? The D, the demand.
Is a mean. So
The mean, right? Is it observable, the D?
Can you give me 30 seconds?
Right?
Yes, can you give me 30 seconds? Because I will like, this is actually a very interesting question. What do I need to know in order to get optimal here? Okay, so just for the intuition, lambda I mean, lambda I is a very important object. Its inverse is a common measure of market liquidity, which gives us slightly more direct interpretations. I might use it sometimes, right? Just for intuition, the more elastic my residual market, right? The smaller my price impact, by definition, and the smaller the price concessions required when trade, right? So the more liquid my market. Okay, something to observe. If I knew my price impact, let's say I could estimate it, I could then compute my best response demand given that I know my marginal utility. Right, this is clear analytically, but a picture would be useful.
And if I can anticipate the capital lambda, right? So the capital lambda is the price impact.
Suppose you can estimate your price impact, and we know that institutional investors routinely estimate their price impacts actually often multiple times per day. Right, so actually you don't need to be an institutional investor. You can go online today and purchase software for price impact estimation if you wish to place a large order. So what traders do is they place these tiny orders to estimate their price impact at the margin, and then they place the main orders. So
because here there is this potential effect of screening and signal through D, right? So, but somehow you're not going to take this into consideration somehow, right? The fact that I don't observe the D of the orders really.
the D.
Yeah, the demand, this.
Oh,
Sure.
I don't need, let's see. Okay, but actually, can you, yeah, that's what I'm going to. So suppose I can estimate my price. I suppose I know my price impact, let's say I estimate it. Given the schedules submitted by others, I'm facing a family of residual supplies with slope lambda, which I estimated, and a random intercept, right? So where does this randomness come from? Well, it comes from the uncertainty about other traders' positions, right? Which shift other traders' submitted demands, and once aggregated, act as my residual supply shifter. Right? So intuitively, I know how I affect prices at the margin. I do not know the size of my residual margin. But I know how I affect prices at the margin. Right, we're going to optimize point-wise. So let's fix a particular realization of the residual supply. By equalizing my marginal utility, which is linear, with the imperfectly competitive residual supply, I can find my optimal quantity and my maximum willingness to pay. So this is the exercise from 101. We are working with a buyer, not a seller. By doing so point-wise, for every possible realization of the residual supply, I don't need to know that. I'm just doing point-wise. We can see that we can compute my best response schedule, knowing my price impact alone. This price impact are endogenous, and on how others fit. That's why we want the second equivalent condition to require that the price impact assumed by a trader in a point-wise optimization is correct. What does it mean? It matches the slope of the actual residual inverse supply defined by aggregation of demand submitted by others. Okay, so that's
So is it obvious that it's without loss to focus on point-wise maximization to get the, so in other words, somehow the distribution doesn't seem to matter. When I submit my own schedule,
Distribution of the, right?
that it's just somehow the schedule can be rid off from my point-wise optimization.
The equivalence for point-wise optimization is very general. It's a very general result. The proof is by differentiability of the objective function. But if you're asking if this relies on the information structure, you don't need to have IPV. I mean, this works. Yeah, with rich information structures, there will be inference, and we can talk about how the inference or adverse selection affects the slope of the demand. Right? I mean, between prices will signal something about that its endowments, and the slope will be affected. But the point-wise optimization itself, the equivalence between choosing functions and choosing points will be here.
It doesn't depend on the fact that somehow the reserve supplies for each realization seems to have the same slope.
Oh, I see what you're saying. The equivalence between point-wise optimization and schedules that I will work with will rely on the linearity. We don't really know much about but we do know something. We do know something. So, but people, yeah, in the settings we know people have shown the equivalence between that. It also depends on the information structure. I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself,
But the best response is linear, right? According to
we are going to work with, yes, we are going to work with linear equilibria, right? So we are not restricting the strategy space in your functions, right? But we will show that given that R is bit linear itself not.
Yeah, so but that's what I'm saying.
Yes.
The best response is linear, so you do not restrict the space.
Right. Okay. Okay, so I wanted to point out a few properties of this model, and you know, this is gonna sound like micro 101, but I think it's gonna be really helpful for the intuition. So notice that in the class of games in demand and supply schedules, we don't need to specify exogenously who is a buyer, who is a seller, like we do in Kuno markets, right? In Kuno models. Whether I'm a buyer or a seller actually depends on who I trade with, and more precisely, on the trading needs or the willingness to pay of my counterparties. I can do it here. So I know that we are working with net demand. What does it really mean? So if I submit a net demand, and the market clearing price is such that my quantity allocated, my trade is positive, then I'm a buyer, right? But if my residual market, so if other traders' trading needs are such that the market clearing price is above the intercept, then I'm a seller. Right? And we are a little bit uncomfortable working with in this quadrant, but we don't have to. Right? We can simply project everything to the first quadrant and work with supply and demand functions. So this is actually how these models work. All right. Which traders matter more for my price impact determination, right? So we know that we can solve this fixed point, the system of I harmonic mean conditions for traders' price impacts. We can solve it in closed form. And actually today I put it on the slide. This is the solution, the price impact of every trader in this model where everybody is large. Derives from the concavity of the payoff functions of the residual market. Other traders' risk aversions are sitting in beta I. And so beta I, the coefficient also depends on the number of traders and all traders' risk aversions. But which traders are more important for my price impact determination, right? So let's suppose we rank traders by their risk preference. Then it turns out that we can rank their price impacts inversely. Why? Well, price impact is characterized as the harmonic mean of inverse demand slopes. The harmonic mean has a property that it puts a higher weight on lower elements. So traders with lower risk aversion will matter more for my price impact determination. Right? Intuitively, these are traders with a more elastic and marginal utility. So these traders are traders with a more elastic marginal utility, more elastic, less elastic. These traders will be willing to absorb a larger fraction of my deviation of my demand range for a given price concession. Traders with more elastic marginal utility. So that's intuitive. They matter more for my pricing by determination. All right, so is price impact good or bad here? I mean, the intuition from IO models, from models of
the lambdas are matrices.
yes, they are matrices, but in the centralized market model, they are proportional to covariance. So we just need to rank. Yes, thank you. Right, is price impact good or bad? Right. So our intuition from working with monopolistic models or even Kuno models from IO tells us that price impact is attractive to a trader, right? But in finance, people talk about price impact costs, price impact avoidance, shredding your demands to avoid price impact, actually shredding the orders dynamically and across venues. Right? People talk about elephant trading. So how can we reconcile these two intuitions? Price impact is attractive in a model of a monopolist or in a Kuno model, but in these models in financial markets, price impacts aren't. And actually, in practice, price impact is seen as a cost. All right, so let's consider two markets.
I don't know why they are in conflict with each other. Even the monopolist, right? I would be happier if I can sell higher quantity at the same high price. But I know that sadly that's not true. So I need to sell short. I need to sell less than I like to, right? Because of the
right.
I desire to maintain high price.
Right. But if we abstract from the commitment issues, or let's see how. Just using your current. All right, so let's just consider two markets. One, all traders are equally risk averse. So alpha I equals alpha for all I. Okay. When all traders are equally risk averse, the buyers, the sellers, so let's suppose I aggregated all demands and supplies, will reduce their demands and supplies by the same fraction. And so the price will actually clear at the competitive price, even though the allocation is highly competitive, right? So now let's look at a model where the buyers are more risk averse than the sellers. Make sure I get it right. So the buyers are more risk averse than the sellers. How do I shade my order? Well, I reduce my demands and supplies in response to my price impact, which is defined by my residual market. Right, so the sellers, it would be the sellers are facing a less elastic residual market than the buyers. They will shade their order more. The buyers are facing a relatively less elastic residual market, so they will trade their orders less. And so this will be the equilibrium price in a perfectly competitive market. But now there is a markup. And so what's the lesson from these simple pictures that are the markups or what a price impact on market power is good or bad depends on the relative complexity or relative concavity of the buyers and the sellers. Right? This is a model with two-sided market power. And when we talk about Cournot or the model of monopoly, this is a model with one-sided market power. And here, both the buyers and the sellers, in fact, everybody's large. So this is how we can reconcile these intuitions. You promised to ask me about the Cournot. Since you haven't, let me do it for you. So you might be wondering why don't people in finance work with Cournot models? Actually, this is a canonical model in finance. The Cournot model, I mean, it's helpful to study market power, but there is a reason why it's not used. Let's consider the Cournot model. Right? Let's consider the Cournot model as a game theoretic model. We have I-large traders and a continuum of price-taking investors. Okay? And now let's look at the key counterfactual, the counterfactual that determines price impact. Right? So let's suppose that one of the large traders, the players, deviates from the equilibrium quantity. I'm increasing my demand at the margin. Who absorbs this deviation? Well, in the Cournot model, the traders submit inelastic quantity schedules. In the Nash counterfactual, other traders are holding the quantity fixed. So the entire demand change is absorbed by the small price-taking traders, rather than the large investors. Well, in financial markets, orders placed by large traders are primarily absorbed by other large traders rather than small price-taking investors. If we drop the competitive demand from the Cournot model, it is not clear what the solution is. Right? So now if we instead work with schedules that are elastic, the counterfactual, after increasing my demand, is well defined, even if other traders hold their scheduled space. They will absorb part of the deviation. I mean, everybody will absorb part of the deviation. These traders are willing to absorb additional units if the price changes by enough. That's exactly how price impact is defined. Okay, all right. Yes.
So even though it's not it's more formally looks has some properties of in the sense that, for instance, the only thing I care about other people's responses is this aggregate the lambda. So like
there are lots of similarities between the Cournot model and I mean these are game theoretic models of imperfect competition.
That's equilibrium.
Right, game theoretic model of imperfect competition. And this is a multilateral oligopoly model, if you will. And the Cournot model is a model of one-sided market power. Right? When the sellers interact with a continuum of buyers.
I just meant formally it looks like it's a game where I just meant formally, not conceptually.
Right.
So this is a model where my best response, if the only thing it depends on others is this aggregate thing the lambda. And I was wondering if people like actually studies games as aggregate games.
Oh, I see what you're saying. I mean, there's a literature on aggregated games. It's a term actually. The model and Jensen has a couple of papers. I think the points there are a little different. I remember looking at it and it is related, but I mean, from a game theory point of view, what's exciting here is actually that this is a fixed point in a sufficient statistic.
Yeah.
Right, so you don't have to think about markets. You can actually write down a gaming contract and formulate it as a fixed point in sufficient statistics. You can study a centralized market gaming contracts or a game or games among groups. Or similarly, there will be a fixed point in sufficient statistics, which players only to know locally. Sorry, I'm not sure if I answered that question. Okay.
What is the reason that the Grossman, the 1983 or 86 paper that he got, allowing the contract space to be rich and he got competitive equilibrium?
Okay, all right. So let's talk a little bit about the history. Yeah, I was wondering if I should. I love talking about the paper, so let's do it. The first person who introduced a game in demand and supply functions formally as defined it as a game and computed magic equilibrium was Grossman. In 1981, he published an econometrical paper saying, hey, we have models of markets where traders submit quantities, right, the Kuhnau models. We have models of markets where traders submit price levels of quantity levels, right? These are the Bertrand models, but in practice, actually, firms often sign contracts or they submit multiple price quantity pairs to hedge the uncertainty in the market. This was the original motivation of Grossman's papers, right? So what was the contribution of the paper? Well, he formulated a game, right? So that he defined the players, the strategies, and the payoffs, and computed match equilibrium. And he found the main result in the paper was that there is a continuum of equilibrium with predictions that vary from perfectly competitive to no trade. Right, so it looked like if we study match equilibrium in these games, and match equilibrium have no predictive power. I mean, anything between perfect competitive allocation and no trade can support it. All right, this was a game with complete information. So then, both Klemper and Mayer came, and they said, well, let's introduce uncertainty in the model. That was actually the original motivation in Grossman's paper, right? Let's allow for uncertainty in the model. This requires the players to bid optimally to not just to the equilibrium price, but to all prices, right? So this refines the shape of your submitted demand and the set of equilibria. Right? But in Grossman's paper, the optimality was determined only at the point. So these slopes were not determined. But if you bid pointwise, if you require pointwise optimization for different realizations of uncertainty, then you pin down the shape of your best response, you refine the lambdas, and you refine the set of equilibria. So the paper by Paul Klemper and Mayer was published in 1989, Econometrica, two results about the set of equilibria in the quadratic model. She showed that the equilibrium is unique.
In linear.
In linear, right? The linear grid.
Right.
And right, for general payoff functions, they show that the set of equilibria is convexive. Right? What does it mean if you have two profiles of demand and supply functions? Any profile between the two of them with respect to prices will be equilibrium. I mean, it looks like a huge set, actually, if you read the proof of that paper. But there is a more recent paper by my co-author on this paper, Senor Malamud, and a couple of other people, showing that you can compute equilibrium with general utility functions and it will be unique. And yeah, that's proof now relies on this equivalence with a lambda function, which will be a function of Q. It will be a function of Q, which is what you wanted.
But my question is this, right? So just even though that Grossman has complete information, but is the reason that you get imperfect competitive outcome because you restrict attention to linear equilibrium, or there be other equilibrium that if you do not restrict attention to the linear equilibrium that give you competitive outcome? That's the question.
No. I mean, Right, so the proof of, no, actually, so the proof of Klemper and Nair show that the linear equilibrium is a unique, it's a unique equilibrium in a set of all possible equilibria.
I guess that the idea is that you have so many leeways off the path, right? That you can point this thing, but so you can use the nonlinearity to support different points when you know a lot of things, complete information. But with the incomplete information, you have no control about which one will be selected. So
But I mean, in games with private information, allocation won't be efficient. I mean, there's nothing specific about the UPA here. Because any mechanism, one question is when I talked out, like to what extent do these results depend on the UPA? Right? You can pick your favorite mechanism, and it could be bargaining impact, or to say that private information, there will be some counterpart of price impact that leads to an inefficient allocation, right? The counterpart of the inefficiency that we attribute to imperfect competition here. So we shouldn't really expect the allocation to be competitive in these markets with a finite number of traders.
Anyway, the first paper on supply function equilibrium, not Grossman.
No, it's Bob Wilson. Absolutely. No. But like, so Bob Wilson wrote another seminal paper. Yes, let me just mention it because yes.
But that's okay.
No, with your advisor, let's give him credit. I talked to him last week, and right. So Bob Wilson wrote a paper before Grossman published a paper. Grossman published a paper in 1981. Supply functions equilibria. Bob Wilson wrote the paper in 1979. Actually, every 6 months I discover a paper written by Bob Wilson, but before I was born, and I'm amazed by how much he understood about problems that we are working on today. It's amazing. So he wrote a paper that started the literature on auction design, on market design for divisible good auctions. And so not auction design for indivisible good objects where there is continuous demand and supply, but auction design for markets with divisible for multi-unit valuations. So specifically what he did was he said, well, in practice, the two designs that are most commonly used are the uniform price auction and the discriminatory price auction, or the pay-as-bid auction. Right? And then what can we say about the revenue efficiency? And he gave some first results. I mean, he also ran into multiplicity issues, but yeah, we now know more about these markets. And Jakub Kassel, whom Lara is working, I mean, he has written many similar papers on structural work. All right, okay. Yay. Just see if I said everything I wanted. Okay. Right. So let's now look at our decentralized markets. By looking at the market structure represented by any a hypergraph in the right way, we'll be able to characterize equilibria through analogous sample conditions. The optimization given my sufficient statistic, given my residual market price impact, and the requirement that the price impact is correct. Okay. In order to see this, I'll make two observations, which will translate into two pieces of notation. So bear with me, and it will pay off, I promise. So first, we're going to treat an asset traded at each exchange as a different asset, regardless of whether the same asset is traded. Why? Because we don't want to assume that the same asset will be traded at the same prices in different exchanges. Generally, it won't be. Okay, so we want to allow for it as a matter of notation. Well, for example, we will treat a market. It's just a specific example. We will treat a market with k assets traded in n exchanges as a market with n times k assets and an n times k by n times k covariance matrix induced by the primitive covariance sigma and the structure of all exchanges, right? So imagine we are stacking the sigma for each exchange along the diagonal. Right, so then each trader who participates in a subset Ni of all exchanges maximizes a quasi-linear quadratic utility function with a covariance matrix being equal to the submatrix of the covariance matrix for the market as a whole that we just constructed. Okay.
So just to clarify, so script B is like, we're lifting sigma to
Mhm.
treat two different traded versions of the same asset as two different assets that are perfectly correlated.
I will use the term lifting to mean something very specific.
Oh,
Actually,
so.
right,
they're-
perfectly
I'll-
correlated. The answer is yes.
Okay,
Let's drop the term lifting, but the answer is yes.
okay.
Thank you so much for coming. All right, second, let's think of the optimization problem of a trader in a decentralized market who submits his contingent demand schedule in the exchanges where he participates. Right, his first order condition equalizes his marginal utility with his marginal payment. Again, we are working with a net buyer here. Given his price impact in the exchanges where he participates, and then the price impact now has an element that corresponds to a within exchange submatrix and the across exchange submatrix, right? And again, if I knew my price impact, I could then compute my best response schedule, given that I know my marginal utility. But these price impacts are endogenous. Okay? They depend on how others bid. So we want the second equilibrium condition to require that the price impact assumed by a trader in his pointwise optimization is correct. That is, it matches the actual Jacobians of the residual supplies defined by aggregation of demand submitted by others in the exchanges where he participates. Well, aggregation in a decentralized market is a bit more subtle. These demands and hence price impacts live on different assets. They are submitted by different traders, and these price impacts can be of different dimensionality. Generally, price impacts will not be independent across exchanges. Right? So we cannot apply aggregation exchange by exchange. So in order to deal with aggregation, or to apply aggregation to all exchanges, we will use a procedure called lifting, which Elliot had anticipated.
Can I ask a quick question? Just in the previous slide, the D subscript NI, can you explain that?
Yes.
No, D subscript NI,
And I
D subscript NI, yeah.
this?
No, the D.
Oh, D. Right. So D is the mean of the assets, but since we constructed, just like we constructed the subscript V, we also reproduce D for all of the assets traded in all exchanges in the market. Right. I should have said that it's like,
Okay.
yeah, it's the same.
It's the same.
Right.
I forgot about that.
All right, so let's use the procedure called lifting to aggregate demands in all exchanges. It's very simple, right? So any symmetric matrix X can be decomposed into a block form, right? So think of X as the script V, where XII lives on the assets traded by agent I. X minus I lives on the complementary subspace. Right, so these will be exchanges traded in which trader I participates. These are complementary exchanges, and Xi minus I is just a rectangular block. For any matrix XII living on the assets traded by agent I, we can define a lifted matrix that lives on all assets traded in all exchanges. Okay. Right, so this large matrix has the dimensionality n times k times n times k in the specific example that I gave. And we will denote the lifted matrices with a bar. That's what the bar meant on the previous slide. Okay, similarly, we can define the inverse of this matrix with a slight abuse of notation. We've just restored the common dimensionality, right, of equilibrium demands by treating them as objects that live in the space of all assets traded in all exchanges. Right, for all traders now, these matrices will have the common dimensionality. We can aggregate them. Are you scratching your? Yeah.
Sorry, can you just clarify, so the last construction, like the order.
Right. No, that's just a terrible notation for the inverse of the elliptic matrix. If you have a better idea of how to define it, so we want to have an inverse of the elliptic matrix.
Okay, but I guess
That's all.
like it's not,
Don't think
Like,
about
it's
the
not-
order
it's
of
not an
operations too
matrix.
much. No.
It's a notation.
but.
Just notation. Yeah, it should be it should not
So
be the
this is,
equality
so
sign.
this is, if that one block that isn't assumed to be zero in the lifted.
Right.
matrix,
Yes.
happens to be invertible,
Well,
then
you know, actually,
what-
I see what you're saying. So, so everything works for the more standard inverse.
okay.
Yeah. You don't have to worry about it, actually. Okay, so now the big payoff comes. Treating assets traded in different exchanges as different assets, right? We introduced two pieces of notation, right? Treating assets traded in different exchanges as different assets and dealing with aggregation through lifting allows us to characterize equilibrium in any decentralized market with two simple conditions. Again, each trader submits a demand schedule defined by equalization of marginal value with a marginal payment. I just collected terms here. Okay. Given his assumed price impact, lambda I, which matches the slope of his residual inverse supply, defined by aggregation of demand submitted by others. And that's what the second condition is saying. And here we are simply projecting back the price impact on the assets traded by agent I. Right. So what happened here? All right, we took the traders' individual demands, we lifted them, right, so to restore the common dimensionality, then we aggregated them, and then we computed for each trader, we computed the residual supply by aggregating the schedules of the traders submitted in his exchanges. We computed the Jacobian of these traders' residual supply. And then we projected it back on the assets relevant for trader I. That's all. That's all we did. Okay, so even though these matrices, price impacts, and the covariances live on local exchanges, when lifted, the usual aggregation condition from centralized markets applies. Observe that we have just transformed the fixed point in schedules in these fragmented markets, in any market structure, into a fixed point price impact matrices again. Okay, so that's another instance where this observation is helpful. Okay, so I just want to, I guess we have 6 minutes. So let me just finish off with building some intuition behind this condition. The summation here aggregates lifted demand schedules. It's taking only the demands from the exchanges where trader I participates, as it should. I different than J in the exchanges where he participates. Right, to define trader I's residual schedule. Okay, question. Do we expect price impacts to be independent across exchanges? Well, in general, they won't be, right? Unless the asset payoffs, the sigma matrix, are independent, right? Unless the asset payoffs are independent, which would mean that the sigma matrix will be diagonal. So here's the mathematical intuition. Well, the second equilibrium condition defines a fixed point in traders' price impacts in all exchanges. It characterizes the price impact of each trader as the harmonic mean of inverse demand slopes. Okay, so any non-zero element of diagonal and the trader I submatrix would migrate to other parts of the matrix after we take the inverse operator. It's the mathematical intuition for the non-separability. Now the economic intuition is the following. Traders' incentives are interdependent across exchanges, right? As long as sigma is interdependent, as long as their repair hessians are interdependent. Okay, so intuitively, my price impact depends on the demand submitted by my counterparties in the exchanges where I'm participating. Okay, and hence on the price impacts of these counterparties, which depend on the price impacts of their counterparties in the exchanges where they are participating with me or other exchanges as well, hence the interdependence. Okay. And then your question, what does a trader need to know in this market in order to bid optimally? To act optimally, this is a very best response or the equilibrium bidding fact. Well, notice again, if I know my price impacts, right, then I can submit my demand schedule. The knowledge of the bid function submitted by others, so my counterparties in the exchanges where I'm participating or any other exchange, the payoff functions, or even the number of traders or the market structure would not change the optimality of my bets with independent private bodies. Yes, so, I mean, there's been some discussion about the role of opacity in decentralized markets.
Can you use this
yeah.
formula, this characterization to play with this, you know, you're saying in the case of the sigma matrix is diagonal, so there is no effect, right? So
If assets are independent, right, did it like, yeah, boring.
but you can try to approximate this diagonal matrix by, you know, doing some. Can you do this kind of approximation to the diagonal just to see the impact, how it works, and when you depart from the, have you tried to do this? I don't know if
For some results, we have a ton of comparative static results. For some results, we did use an approximation actually.
Yeah.
So
because
thinking
it's
more
good,
computational.
exactly.
Well, then this is an analytic expression.
No, sure, but in terms of the intuition of the impact, how the impact works, right?
Right. But you can actually do quite a bit of comparative statics without relying on any approximation. Okay, I think my time is up. So yeah, some we had to do some work to get to these three questions, but now I'll just work with examples tomorrow, actually, and then at the end I'll talk about some other questions. Thank you so much, and yeah, I really appreciate your time. And again, I'm here. Happy to talk.
What is your question about cancellation of fee?
No, I'm still trying to understand how you know, you explained a little bit to the picture you showed, now that how we can, you don't see more the D because you're solving for each realization. This D is something that I observe, right, as a trader, right? My realization. And then I go to the market with this demand function, right? And then you compute the sex of the asset, the market clearing provision, right? How the deeds appear, so you're solving for each realization of D. Because in a way, the distribution of the Ds and the QI does not really matter for the
Think of D as a constant. D, the meaning is a constant. D
is a constant.
Oh yeah, D is a constant.
It's like
Yeah. D is a constant. So
and the QI
the asset payoffs are generally distributed, but these are constant, and the
these
covariance matrix is a constant here, right? These are just parameters in the longitudinal distribution for the asset payoffs.
And they are observable.
Right. They're observable. This is why I know my marginal.
The QI not is not observable, right?
I know my own initial endowments, but I don't know initial positions of others. I know my position. I don't know the positions of others. That's why I optimize both twice.
Now I see, because I was completely confused when how we solve the model itself. I thought there was like a private information.
You could have private information.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Good, thank you. I think I should.
Because in the very first
disconnect some.
slide, you put something in the distribution of this D, right?
Mhm.
I got this wrong.
Could you say it again?
The first slide, the very first one that we show the model, you're talking about the distribution of this.
You can leave, I think.
Oh, I just leave, I see.